Combining the best of daily fantasy and survivor pools, Stat Hero is the next chapter in fantasy sports. No more competing with the sharks or experts ever, because your only competition is Stat Hero itself. The face of DFS has changed. Finally, a game designed for the rest of us.
Hey, what's going on? Jeff Ratcliffe here. Week 8 fantasy football is upon us, and you know at PFF, we love our stats. So let's take a look at some advanced stats that you need to know here. We'll do the top 5 for Week 8. And I mean, we're going to start right at the top. Chase Edmonds absolutely exploded last week for fantasy purposes, and very few people saw that one coming for sure. Because, hey, we thought David Johnson was going to play more than just 3 snaps. But he didn't. Now, I don't think we should necessarily be surprised by Edmonds' performance, though. While it was surprising, not necessarily a surprise, and here's why. So far this season, Chase Edmonds has generated 3.25 yards after contact per attempt. David Johnson, on the other hand, only 2.01. That's among the lowest in the league for David Johnson, whereas Edmonds, not the highest in the league, but certainly an above-average number. Why is this important? Well, yards after contact per attempt shows how these guys are generating yards independent of their blocking. And let's face it, for fantasy purposes, more yards after contact, well, that's just more fantasy points. And so far, Chase Edmonds has been more effective in that regard. And it isn't just this week. Edmonds has been doing this all along every time he gets the opportunity. Now, we'll keep an eye on David Johnson's status. Of course, the team did sign Alfred Morris this week, but they really didn't have much depth there. So I don't know if exactly that's an indicator that Johnson isn't going to play. But the genie is out of the bottle at this point on Chase Edmonds. If you have him, he's going to be a factor going forward. Let's go to the second stat here. We got to talk about Melvin Gordon, who has not been a factor since returning to the Los Angeles Chargers. I know a lot of fantasy owners are frustrated, but here are the stats that I have. I have 3 numbers for you. Ready? 1, 2, and 3. Those do not sound advanced. I get it, but here's what I'm talking about. Over the last 3 weeks, he faced the Steelers, who were the number 2 defense currently in PFF grading against the run. Then he faced the Broncos, who are the number 1 defense against the run. Then he faced the Titans, who are the number 3 against the run. And of course, how does he follow that up? With the Chicago Bears this week. The schedule has been absolutely brutal. Now, this is not to excuse Gordon's play per se. He's part of this equation, but I don't think we can completely disregard the matchups. The matchups have been absolutely terrible for him. Offensive line play hasn't done him many favors either. If anything, well, I mean, Gordon is an RB2. Austin Eckler, by the way, didn't really get anything done on the ground. All of his fantasy points came as a receiver last week. So he's in the same range. These two are kind of interchangeable as RB2s at this point, unfortunately. That being said, if you believe that Gordon's schedule is going to be better, which it doesn't look that pretty, to be honest with you, then maybe a buy low. I think at this point, though, it might be a lost season for Melvin Gordon fantasy owners, and he's no spring chicken as well, so keep that in mind. It's not a guy to acquire if you're in a dynasty league. Let's go to the third stat here, and we're sticking with the running back position. Ezekiel Elliott, so far this season, pretty solid year. Not the most efficient on a per-touch basis, but he is getting it done for fantasy purposes, and a big part of that, especially this past week here, is his use in the red zone. Currently leads the league with 37 carries in the red zone. Those are uber important carries for fantasy purposes because the closer you are to the end zone when you get a touch, the more likely you are to score a touchdown. For running backs, I mean, hey, red zone carries are where it's at, and Ezekiel Elliott is just racking up these red zone carries. So his stock, his fantasy arrow continues to point up here. Again, not going to be the most efficient guy, but is a guy who's going to touch the ball a whole heck of a lot, so that's good for fantasy purposes. If you have Zeke, I mean, hey, we sweated a little bit in the preseason with the holdout, but everything is all good, and the team continues to feed him the rock. Plus having Amari Cooper there keeps opposing defenses honest. All right, let's go to the quarterback position. Let's talk about Matthew Stafford. Right now, Matthew Stafford leads the league in average depth of target at 11.3. That means that on average, his throws are going 11.3 yards in the air. That's a big-time number right there. Typically, this is about where we see the league leaders at the end of each season, 11.3, 11.5, right in that range. Why this number is important? Well, it means big play upside. I mean, we saw it last week for sure from Marvin Jones, but we're going to see it at times from Kenny Golladay. And hey, Matthew Stafford He's not an elite fantasy quarterback. By no means, nobody's going to make that claim. But is he a guy who's going to give you some quality starts through the course of the season as a priority streamer? Absolutely. He's kind of returned to the Matthew Stafford of old. And this week, up against the New York Giants, really like him as a streamer. If you're hurting, if you lost Patrick Mahomes, if you don't have Lamar Jackson, you could do worse than Matthew Stafford this week for sure. All right, let's wrap it up with the Houston Texans wide receivers. Of course, Will Fuller, the injury happened. Seems like every season this guy gets hurt. And obviously going forward here, Kenny Stills is going to replace him on the outside, along obviously opposite DeAndre Hopkins. And what I like about Kenny Stills is there's a comparable skill set to Will Fuller. In fact, I have an interesting stat here that really highlights that. So far this season, Will Fuller has seen a deep ball target on 35% of his targets. So a deep ball target at PFF, we define that as a ball that goes at least 20 yards in the air. Further downfield these guys are targeted, the more big play upside they offer. Well, Kenny Stills is at 36.8, so 37%. He's basically in the same exact range as Will Fuller. So when Stills gets on the field, I mean, granted, is he as good as Fuller? Maybe not, but is he 90 to 95% of Fuller? Yes. He was a priority pickup this week, and just like we saw with Fuller, who had a couple weeks ago, remember, an enormous game for fantasy purposes, Stills offers that same juice going forward here as long as Fuller is off the field. Yes, Hopkins is still going to dominate the targets, but hey, Kenny Stills last week had 2 catches of over 40 yards. He has big play upside, so if he somehow slipped through waivers in your leagues, go out and pick him up, or if you did pick him up, you have something good on your hands for the next couple weeks. You like these stats, you want more of them, of course, we have all the stats you can handle, plus rankings, projections, and fantasy tools, along with the best football information in the business. All of that is over at PFF.com.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel, and if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.